Hello everyone, this is Miss Smith. This is your first catch-up session of 2021. So this catch-up session is on an inspector calls, and the reason why it's on an inspector calls is that we are planning for you to answer an inspector calls question on your trial exam when they come about later this term. So this is the kind of first session to get you back into thinking about an inspector calls, although I know that a lot of you have been working really hard on completing the Seneca homework tasks, which will have been refreshing your memory about an inspector calls. So today we're looking at world building. So we're looking at how Priestley creates the world of Brumley in the play. Okay, so for this lesson, it would be really helpful if you had a sheet of A4 paper, and if you've got one, a sheet of A3 as well, plain paper, because you're going to be sketching and drawing out Brumley. So if you haven't got those things with you at the minute, you might want to just pause the video and go off and get them. It would also be helpful for you to have some lined paper to make notes on, or a notebook as well. Okay, so if you need to go and get those things, you might want to get some pencils and felt tips in different colours and things like that as well. You can go and get those as well. They will be handy. Okay, and come back when you're ready. Okay, so if you're ready and you've got everything you need, the first thing that I want you to think about is what places we might find in Brumley. So we're going to start to think about what is Brumley like. So your first task that I want you to do, and I want you to spend about 5 minutes on it, is to list as many places as you can that we would find in Brumley. Okay, so you might be able to remember some off the top of your head, which is brilliant, but you're probably also going to be able to skim through your copy of your play as well. Okay, so I've started you off there. Your first one is the Berlin household. We know that they live in Brumley, so you can put that one on. What else can you remember, and then what can you get from your book when you have a flick through? So spend 5 minutes doing that, please, and then come back to me when you've got your list. Okay, so here's my list. So if you've got them all, then give yourself a pat on the back. That's brilliant. If not, if you've missed any of them, just take a few minutes to add them to your list now. Okay, so we've got the Berlin household, as we said. We've got Mr. Berlin's factory, and we know that the Croft family have also got a works factory as well. There's Eva Smith's room that Inspector Gould tells us about, where he has obviously got a diary from and things like that, but also Eric references it as well. There's obviously a police station, there's a police force, there's Millward's store. The West Brumley Golf Course is a place that's referred to as well. The Palace Variety Theatre and the Stalls Bar there. The infirmary where Eva Smith ends up. The Magistrates Court. The Town Hall. The County Hotel. Famously, we've got Charlie Brunswick's rooms in Morgan Terrace, where Gerald takes Daisy Renton. And we have got the meeting room of the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation. So that's all of the places that are mentioned throughout the play. Of course, we don't go to them, and if we were watching the play in the theatre, we would never see these settings. But various characters, either the inspector himself or the characters that he is interviewing and questioning, mention these places. So when you look at them, you can start to build up your sense of what kind of place Brumley is. It's a town, and we can see that it's got the kind of administrative places that help with the running of the town, such as the town hall, the police station, the magistrates court. We've got things like the infirmary, which would be obviously for taking care of people, hospital. We've also got some places of entertainment and some places that are associated with leisure, like the theatre and like the golf courses. And then we've got the places where people work and where people earn money, and where people live. Okay, so be thinking about what those kinds of places tell us about what sort of place Brumley is, and what it might be like to live there. It's recognisably a town, isn't it? I'm not describing anything alien to you when I'm asking you to look at these things. You can picture it. It doesn't sound that dissimilar to somewhere like Whitley Bay or Newcastle in lots of ways, although the words are kind of more old-fashioned than we would expect, but it's familiar, isn't it? Okay, so make sure you've got all of those places on your list before you move on, and once you've done that, you can move on to the next slide. Okay, so your first main task today is to map out Brumley. I want you to create a map, and I want you to mark on it each of those locations that we've just listed. Okay, so we've got lots of different locations. I don't know what Brumley looks like, you don't, so you're going to have to use your imagination. There's not really a right answer. I'm not going to look at your map and say you've put that in the wrong place or that doesn't go there. It's completely up to you. So you're kind of going to be a town planner a little bit today. So you're going to need to use your list, and you're going to have a think about where things go. Okay. Obviously, some things will probably be very much in the town centre. If you do use Whitley Bay or North Shields or Newcastle as a kind of reference point for yourself, then things will make sense. Think about where you put the factories, think about things like the town hall, places like that, and shops like Millward's probably more in the centre of town, whereas things like the golf course, again, if you think about Whitley Bay, more towards the edges of the town where there's more land. Okay, so that's your task. Before you begin to do your map, on your A4 sheet of paper, can you do a little border about 1 inch wide? Because later on, you're going to add a little bit of information into that border. You're going to add some notes there. So leave yourself a little border and draw your map on the inside of that. Okay, so I'm going to show you some slides before I ask you to get cracking with your map. I'm going to show you some slides to show you what your map might ultimately look like. But remember, there's no right answer to what Brumley looks like, and everybody's will look quite different. So don't worry about that. Okay, so this is the one that I took a photograph out of from a study guide. Give you some ideas. Obviously, we're going to try to plot more things on the map than that. This is the one that a student produced. So you can see the plan of the buildings, and there's a little hint as to some of the information that I'm going to ask you to write on later on. But at this moment, you're just going to draw the buildings and place them. And here's another one. Okay. So go back to the slide with the task on. So for about 10 minutes, can you map out all of the buildings on your list? Okay, where do you think those buildings would go? 10 minutes to create your map of Brumley now. And when you're ready, if you come back, I'll tell you what I want you to do next. Off you go. Okay, so I'm presuming that you've spent 10 minutes doing your map and you've got everything in place and you're quite happy with how you've planned things out. Your next task, which I'm sure you knew was coming because you saw those images before, which were all annotated, I want you to start marking things onto your map for me, please. So 2 things, first of all, think about each place. So make sure you've labelled each place, so infirmary, town hall, and so on. Which characters are associated with each place? Which ones is Mr. Berlin associated with? Are there certain ones that Eva is associated with? Some that the inspector is associated with? Which characters would you associate with each place? And then the second thing for you to note on is what happens at each place. So is it a place where Eva Smith works? Is it a place where she gets fired from? Is it a place where you go to for help and assistance? Okay, so literally what is meant to happen at each place. And then the sort of sub-question in relation to that, what actually happens there? And is that different from what is meant to happen there? So for example, in my mind, I'm thinking about the Brumley Women's Charity Organisation. It's meant to be a place where you go to receive help or support if you need it. What actually happens when Eva Smith goes there is she's turned away. Okay, so for each one, have a think about what's meant to happen there and what actually happens there, and is there a difference between the two? And then once you've done that, can you have a little think about the infirmary and have a little, as you kind of flicking through your text looking for what happens at each place and who's associated with each place, have a look at how many times the inspector mentions the infirmary, and perhaps note it down on your map, and have a little bit of a think about what you notice and what the effect of that is. Okay, so that's probably going to take you about 10 minutes. It might take you a little bit longer. Okay, but pause the video while you do it and come back when you're ready. Okay, so you should now have your map. You should have who's associated with each place on your map. You should have what happens there, and if it's different, then you may be starting to notice a little bit about how many times the inspector is mentioning the infirmary. It's several times is the answer. He keeps coming back to it quite often, and one of the things that he seems to be doing is reminding us of Eva Smith, and he does so in quite a grotesque way. He's quite, well, not, maybe grotesque is the wrong word, quite a brutal way. Okay. Obviously, if you think about that activity that I just asked you to do, what's meant to happen at each place and what does happen, well, hopefully many times we hope that people are cared for and that lives are saved in hospitals. On this occasion, Eva Smith's life wasn't saved, but the inspector, rather than focusing on the care he receives, he keeps focusing on her kind of brutal end, and he tells us things that she's lying on a slab and things like that. So he keeps kind of, in questioning the characters, he sort of takes us on a bit of a journey around Brumley, and we get a sense of what they expect Brumley to be like and what kind of place it is. But then he keeps returning to the kind of cold, hard, final, brutal image of Eva Smith on the hospital slab. Okay. So let's think about what kind of place Brumley is in a little bit more detail. Your next task is to track Eva Smith's journey around Brumley. And I want you to think about, as you're doing it, so you can kind of mark on her little footsteps or do little dashes to show where she's been. I'll show you in a moment how that's been done on some of the ones that are on the PowerPoint. But as you're tracking her journey around Brumley, I want you to be thinking about and noting down, who does she meet at each place and what kind of interaction does she have with them? Does she receive care from people? Is it a positive interaction? Is it a friendship? Is it helpful? Is it meaningful in some way? Make a note of it on your map. And as you're doing so, what do you notice? As she goes around her life and about her business in Brumley, how is she treated by people? Could you categorise, once you've got everything down on your map and you're stepping back and looking at it, could you categorise the way that she is treated by other characters in Brumley? Does Priestley present the relationships and interactions that she has with them as kind, cruel, prejudiced, self-serving, something else completely different? Annotate your map. You might want to use different colours from the colours that you've been writing in before. Before you do that, I'll just quickly flick back to show you some of these maps, and you can see, so I don't know if you can see, I hope you can, the little sort of dashes there to represent Eva Smith's journey as she moves around Brumley, and the little arrows there showing where she goes. And you can see the kinds of places that she's going to and the kind of interactions that she has with people. So it's kind of sexual interactions, where she's supposed to receive care at the infirmary, the town hall where she's meant to be supported. It's an administrative place, but we hear about girls getting assaulted there, and we kind of worry about what might have happened to Eva Smith. You will note, as you do this, that she never arrives at the Berlin household. That's a place that she never visits. Ironically, her presence is felt very heavily there in the Berlin household during the inspector's interrogation of them. Okay, so mark on Eva Smith's journey. Who does she meet? What kinds of interactions does she have with them? Your map should be coming as detailed and as full as this one. Okay, I think that'll probably take you about 5 minutes. Come back to the video when you're ready for the next step. Okay, so earlier on, I asked you to leave about an inch around your map. What I want you to do in that space is to think about what goes on beyond Brumley, what's happening in the world beyond Brumley, because it's a very intense, kind of closed off setting, isn't it? We can picture the life of the town of Brumley, but what goes on beyond that, and where do people come from? So some places that you might want to mark on. We hear references to the countryside. Okay, we hear from the inspector and Mr. Berlin talking about the country. So the country is a place where landed people like the Crofts live, so people who are aristocratic, who have lots of money that they have inherited and passed down through their family. So make sure you mark on that we've got the countryside beyond Brumley where the Crofts live, but also there's a kind of another version of the country, like the little villages we presume where Eva Smith is from. And that's interesting, isn't it, to think about that, because that kind of makes both Gerald and Eva kind of outsiders to Brumley. And Gerald, obviously being a person who is male, but also a person who is very wealthy, when he comes into Brumley, he does so because it's a place where he can make more money and he can interact with people and he can do whatever he likes. We see him doing whatever he likes in this play. But for Eva Smith, she's an outsider and she comes to the town because she needs to make money. And that's very difficult for her, isn't it? It's difficult for her to kind of get a foothold in Brumley and improve her life. And she lives a kind of quite a life filled of movement, really, in Brumley. She doesn't settle. She's moving from one job and one role to another, isn't she? And she's trying to kind of gain a foothold, whereas Gerald, because he's privileged, kind of just comes into Brumley and takes what he needs and gets what he wants out of life there, and he really capitalises on it. The other place that you should mark into the margin around your map is the seaside, which the inspector tells us Eva or Daisy goes there after the end of her relationship with Gerald. And tellingly, the inspector tells us that she goes there to think about their relationship and to kind of come to terms with what happened. And she goes there, he says, to make the relationship last a little bit longer in her head and perhaps to make sense of it. And again, that's interesting. It's like she can't cherish the memory of Gerald if that's what she wants to do, or she can't make sense of the relationship that she's had with Gerald while she's still inside the town of Brumley. Perhaps it's too intense. She needs a little bit of distance. She needs a bit of open space and the sea air to kind of clear her mind and think about it. Okay, so make sure you jot those things down on the edges of your map now, please. And when you've done that, come back to the video and we'll move on. Okay, so earlier I said to you, if you've got a sheet of A3, it would be great if you can stick your A4 map onto the larger sheet and leaving the space around the edges so you can write on them. If you don't have a sheet of A3, don't worry, you can simply do this next part on the back of your map. Okay, so now you've got a map for the setting for the plot of the play. What I want you to think about now is a kind of bigger element to do with setting, which is the time in which the play was set. Okay, so when we're talking about settings, we've got the physical setting, where does it take place, but we've also got the time in which the play is set, and we know how important that is. You've talked about that a lot in lessons during year 10. So what I want you to do now is use the space around the edges of your map or on the back of your map to make a note about what is going on in 1912. So we know it's set in 1912. So what implication does that have? What was going on in 1912 in the wider world around Brumley? So there's some clues on the image there, on the slide, sorry, to help you. Okay, so again, use your own memory. You might want to go back to your notes, see what you can add. What was going on in 1912? Come back to the video when you're ready. Okay, so here's again those maps that I showed you earlier with a little bit of extra information around them. So you can see down the left-hand side there what was going on in 1912. So the idea of inequality, the build up to the First World War, the class distinctions that there were in society, the fact that the working classes didn't have as much access to education, the lack of rights for women, but a kind of gradual building up of agitation from the suffragists and the suffragettes, the fact that it's a patriarchal society, all of those kinds of things. And probably you've got additional things that you've remembered too, sinking of Titanic, build up to lots of strikes, miners' strikes, those kinds of things. So now you're not just thinking about Brumley itself, you're thinking about the wider setting. Okay. And can you have a think now about 1945, that later setting, and see if you can add, as this one has got here, can you add some extra contextual details about the setting of 1945 in which Priestley was writing? Okay, so once you've got your information about the contextual settings of the play, I want you to look back at your map. Have a really good look at your map and think about, for you, which place is the most important place in Brumley. So think about the story that Priestley is telling about Brumley and about the people who live there, and think about the message that he's trying to convey to us as an audience. Think about what he's saying about socialism versus capitalism, about society, about belonging. For you, what do you think is the most important place in Brumley that allows Priestley to convey that message? And when you've got an idea, make a note of it on your lined paper or in your notebook, please, and explain to yourself why. When you're ready, come back and we'll talk a little bit more. Okay, so there's lots of places that you could have picked. So I did mention before that the inspector keeps returning to the infirmary and reminding us of the fate of Eva Smith and that her eventual death, and the fact that the selfishness and the irresponsibility of society is what's led to that. So you might want to say that the infirmary is possibly the most important location, or you might think it's something like the factory, Mr. Berlin's factory, because arguably that's what kind of set everything in motion, that strike there. And we know that we've thought about the wider context and the fact that working class workers weren't getting a really great deal in factories at the time, so that sort of is influencing the plot of the play, and that we've got characters like Eva Smith who then go out and strike. So is it that strike action and that conflict with Mr. Berlin at the Berlin factory that you think is really important in terms of setting, because that sets everything in motion? Do you think that it's the Berlin household and the fact that although we've spent this lesson kind of plotting out all of these different places and it's making us visualize Brumley and think about Brumley, actually that is the world beyond the Berlin household, and you actually think that the Berlin's house and that setting is really important because it reminds us of that closed off world that they have, and that although they can kind of easily maneuver life in Brumley and make their way through it, and they survive and thrive there, people like Eva Smith can't. But for the Berlins, they can just retreat to their house and kind of close off wider society and live that really privileged lifestyle. Or do you think that somewhere like the apartment on Morgan Terrace is a really important setting for you because it shows that very casual attitude that Gerald has, and that he can have whatever he wants, whatever woman he wants, and he can kind of store her away in this property that his friend owns, and that just really represents his kind of privilege and that luxurious lifestyle he has in comparison to Eva Smith, and it shows her as just almost like a piece of property. So there's loads of different settings that you might have chosen as being really important. And again, if I asked all of you, we could all have completely different ideas. There's not a right answer here. It is your opinion, as long as you can explain it. Okay. So what I want you to think about now is to think about what else does your map reveal. So again, looking back at it and just noticing, we talk a lot in English about what do you notice, and we're all going to notice different things, and this activity is going to reveal different things to you, but it is important every so often to just think, right, what do I notice? What do you notice about Brumley? And have a think about these 3 things as a starting point, but you might notice other things as well. Do you notice that Brumley is actually a pretty hypocritical place? It's a place where we've got a women's institute that's meant to kind of help, a women's charity rather, that's meant to help and provide support to women, but turns women away because actually they're kind of, the women who are involved are pretty sort of condescending and snobby about working class women. Does it reveal something to you about the class structure of Brumley, and does it reveal the kind of rigid divisions that exist within Brumley society? Does it really highlight to you the real unkindness of the characters that Priestley has placed in Brumley? And does it kind of hit home to you how difficult it is for somebody like Eva Smith to survive there? Okay, so have a look, make some notes, add some extra details using these 3 bullet points as a starting point, and add any extra thoughts of your own. Spend a few minutes doing that and then come back when you're ready. Have a little think about these, all of the different elements that you've noticed, and have a think about whether or not Priestley is saying they are unique to Brumley. I don't think they are. I don't think those 3 bullet points that are on the slide are things that we would only find in Brumley. I think they are things that we could find in towns and cities across the country, really, aren't they? Excuse me. And I don't think that they are things that Priestley would say would be unique to a town in 1912. I think many of the things that are on the PowerPoint slide there are things that we talk about quite frequently now in relation to society. Just keep jotting down any additional thoughts that you have. Okay, so just a few reminders before we finish off. So Brumley is a fictional town, and as I've just said, it really could be any town, couldn't it? But it is a place that is divided, isn't it? Your map should have revealed to you, I think, that it is a place of deep class division, and that Mr. Berlin and Eva would describe the town in very different terms, and they would describe it in as a place where they've both got access to very different things. You know, Mr. Berlin talks to the inspector about the golf course. Eva Smith would not go to the golf course, would she? Gerald talks about meeting Eva Smith in the Palace, the Stores Bar at the Palace Theatre. Now, Eva and Gerald have got very different purposes in going there, haven't they? Eva is trying to survive. Gerald is trying to entertain himself and indulge his various vices and wants, isn't he? So it's a town that means different things to the different characters. It's quite a restrictive place for Sheila as well, isn't it? You know, as a young woman, she can't move around the town in the same way that her brother can. Okay, really quickly, here's some images to just help you visualize it apart from your map. So the Berlins might live in somewhere like that, or the Crofts certainly kind of on the outskirts of the town or into the countryside. But Eva Smith is working in places like this, and she's possibly living in small rooms in places like that. Okay, whereas the Berlins and Gerald are enjoying luxurious dinners in dining rooms like this one. So it's very much a place of contrasts, and Priestley uses that really well, doesn't he, to his advantage throughout the play. So some of the contrasts that he's trying to draw our attention to, and again, I would jot these things down either on your map or in your notebook. He's trying to highlight the contrast between the classes there. Huge contrasts between wealth and poverty, and that's obviously connected with class. There are also contrasts between men and women. Again, I spoke about the golf course before, but the golf course is also a place that women don't go to. Okay, so it's a place where that's kind of quite close to women, and it's a place where men meet other men and they network. Mr. Berlin talks about, I think, playing golf with Colonel Roberts. And the inspector disdainfully says, I don't play golf. And he's sort of poking fun and being sarcastic at Mr. Berlin. But it means that he's not involved in those kinds of negotiations that men like Mr. Berlin can get up to on the golf course. They can kind of advance themselves. They can gain more power by making connections in that kind of setting. So the locations that are placed in Brumley draw attention to the difference between men and women. And again, if you think about the factories and the works, the women in this play are the workers in the factories, the men are the people who own the factories. So that's a useful element of the setting as well, isn't it? And again, that ties in with ideas about the distinctions and the contrasts between power and powerlessness. And Eva Smith's journey through all of these settings really emphasizes her powerlessness, doesn't she? I said before, she kind of can't take hold anywhere, can she? She can't kind of gain a foothold and a sense of permanence. And obviously a key concern of Priestley, both of these settings, all of these settings highlight the contrast between capitalist and socialist beliefs and ideologies. Okay, so last thing to think about is this idea about setting. We've spent a long time mapping out the setting and looking at Brumley, and clearly Priestley spent a long time thinking about Brumley and thinking about what was there and what it was like and how he could use it as a place to kind of create contrasts. But why do you think that after creating that world, Priestley doesn't then really allow the audience to enter into it? We're not really allowed to set a foot in Brumley. He chooses to set the action of the play within the Berlin household, and very specifically in the Berlin dining room. Why do you think Priestley does that? am I kind of answering this in the next bullet point, or do you think something different? Is it because he's sort of shutting the world of Brumley out and kind of putting the Berlins safe and secure in their household until the inspector arrives? Or is he putting it just kind of out of reach of the audience? And if you think he's doing that, why do you think he's doing that? Again, there's no right answer. I simply want you to jot down your thoughts and have a think about that for yourself. And then the very last thing before I finish is I just wanted to point out to you that everything you've thought about this afternoon in relation to Brumley and Priestley's creation of the world of Brumley is modelling to you how to create a world for characters and for stories, which is really helpful for you, because on language paper 1 question 5 you might be trying to create a setting and create a world. So use Priestley as a model, if you like, and in the future you can think about, when you're creating your own worlds, well, what does Priestley do and what could you borrow from him? Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Well done for working so hard. If you can take some photographs of your maps and email them to your English teacher, or upload them to Teams, whatever you and your teacher have agreed to do, that would be wonderful, because I'm sure they'll be really keen to see the work that you've produced today. Thanks very much. Well done.